This is an open letter to my pink-skinned friends. Most of you happen to be, in part of the living in NATO countries. Here's the thing, folks. Here's the thing regarding Ukraine. What I see in the media and now in social media, apparently, there is this algorithm that gives priorities to certain posts and hides other posts. So social media is turning into media that is bringing up those points that the system wants everybody to know, and hiding those viewpoints that previously the media didn't approve of. So now the social media doesn't show, doesn't pick up, doesn't show, doesn't post. So this has become another form of, before the media used to, not before, and now the media used to just, put certain news up and hide other news. Now social media is doing exactly the same thing, hiding people who post certain posts, but bringing up and showing certain posts that the system approves of. And as you can see, that the whole thing about Ukraine is right, and we have to help Ukraine, and Ukrainians are all good and great and wholesome, and the Russians are bad, 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 bad. And you see this. The thing is, I don't know if anybody has any kind of memory, if short-term memory still exists. But if short-term memory exists, we should remember in last 3-4 years, there were at least two news connected to Ukraine, in which there is a lot of apparently corruption in Ukraine. And on one side of this corruption apparently is in Ukraine, and the other side of this corruption is apparently with Uncle Sam's managers. And for example, what were these two news? One was, Mr. Hunter Biden being on the board of directors, being given a job to sit at the board of directors of some, oil company or gas company, some kind of large energy company in Ukraine. Although Mr. Hunter Biden doesn't have any skills of being a board member anywhere, no knowledge of energy issues, of any of that. It was just obvious that it was a sweetheart deal. Somebody decided that it's a good idea to have him on board and pay him $50,000 a month. Apparently the number was $50,000 a month. So that took care of the Democratic side of the Uncle Sam's managers. On the Republican side, we heard that these mafioso guys in Ukraine apparently found a way to push some money into the donation coffers of the Republican Party through Mr. Giuliani. So you see that it's like in Ukraine, apparently all of this happening in Ukraine. Apparently there are these people who corruption is apparently rampant, and they have the tentacles of this corruption has reached the managers of United States, managers of Uncle Sam. And you think to yourself that so it seems Ukraine has some issues. And because, in any normal country, having, the son of a very prominent politician of another country being invited to be on the board of the directors of one of the main, energy companies of that country, that's unheard of. I mean, can you imagine, the an independent country like, let's say Venezuela, let's say Colombia, let's say Brazil, let's say one of these independent countries that are not really corrupt, inviting the son of the president of France to be, or son of one of the senators of France or Germany to be on the board of directors of their company. It just doesn't make sense. So here's the thing. We know there is corruption, and the tentacles of this corruption has reached into United States. Then you see all of this is happening while Ukraine is sitting right next to Russia on a very important spot on the Black Sea. Here's the thing. The British, who are, the most bloodthirsty race on this planet, have had many issues with the Turks, with the Russians, with the Greek, with everybody around there. The British have had an issue. When I say an issue, I mean a real war with every one of the people on that area around the Black Sea, with the Russians, with the Turks, because the British want to keep control. For some reason, the British think it's their right to have control of all the waterways all over planet Earth. They did it alone previously. Now they're doing it with the help of the NATO, the wolf pack. That is NATO, with, especially with the help of Uncle Sam's managers. The British have been able to continue having their say, having their control all over in the waterways all over planet Earth, and that's punching a lot above their weight. The British are a country of 90 million people. 90 million. The Pakistan has triple is the size of British. Has 280 million people. The Pakistanis, twice at least the size of the British. So my point is this. 3 times the size of the British. My point is this, that the British have fought many wars with Russia, specifically over Ukraine. And you can see that Ukrainians apparently are very corrupt, have been very corrupt, because they are sitting next to Russia, and in order for the British to have a say over there, the British have always tried to corrupt the Ukrainians. Because they're so close to Russia, so the British could have used the Ukrainians as a post, as a landing ground to attack Russia, to, bug Russia, to bother Russia. When you want to, bother people, you need a landing ground, you need a foothold next to them in order to, use that foothold in order to, bother them. So a jab here, a jab there, whatever. So the British, now the NATO, wants a landing ground, a foothold next to Russia in the shape of Ukraine. And this corruption has been one way of getting Ukraine into the pocket of NATO, in the pocket of the West. So, because I believe this president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, apparently, I think he's doing the worst for his population, the worst of the worst. I don't know, it's because of his ignorance, that he's a comedian, actor, he doesn't know geopolitics, he doesn't understand geopolitics, or it's not ignorance and it's malice. He actually knows what the fuck is doing, and he's continuing to do it because he just doesn't care. Because simple logic states that if you're sitting next to a greater power, a big penis such as Russia, you have to work with them. If your geography is such that you have landed next to these motherfuckers, you have to, and these motherfuckers are paranoid, they're big, paranoid Russians, you have to work with them. If you don't want your country to be demolished by the Russians, you work with them. They say, okay, you be neutral, don't be part of NATO. You say, okay, I will be neutral, I will not be part of NATO, but here I want these, these advantages. You have to give me these. You draw up a map too. You say, I will not be part of NATO if I can get these things from you, these advantages, or I can give these brownie points from you. And the Ukrainians were getting some brownie points. Apparently, they wanted more. They're getting a transit fee of, they were getting transit fee in transiting gas, Russian gas to Europe. They were getting a nice fat transit fee for that pipeline. And apparently that was not enough. They could have asked for more things from the Russians in order to sweeten the deal and accept to be neutral. But apparently Mr. Zelensky was under orders from, Uncle Sam's managers, from CIA, from MI6, that no, you don't accept any deals from the Russians and you just insist on independence. Insist of independence from what? It's sort of like saying that Mexico has the right to go and, play footsie with the KGB, with the Russians, or I mean, we saw what happened to Cuba when the Cubans started playing footsie with the Russians, with the Soviets, with the Russians, with whatever, and they've been sitting in the corner for 70 years now, because they decided to play footsie with an outside power, while sitting next to Uncle Sam. So that was a no-no. And Cubans decided that their independence is worth it. Now they've been suffering for 50 years. The same thing applies to the Ukrainians. They have borders. Now Cuba is an island. The Ukrainians literally have a border with Russia. If Russia says, hey, we can, stay in good terms as long as you be neutral and and at least you be friendly to me because I'm your fucking neighbor. The Ukrainians, if their president had any geopolitical knowledge, if he wanted what's good for his people, he would have taken the deal from the Russians. He would say, yeah, let's sit down, let's have a meal, let's together with these other fucking countries that are around Russia, with the Tajiks and the Kazakhs and Belarusians and all of these, we have a good relationship. We are part of whatever they are, Shanghai Cooperation Council or whatever. Somehow, some kind of organization on friendly terms with the big neighbor who is Russia. And I'm sure they could have got some kind of brownie points for being friends to the fucking big penis that is Russia. But saying that, no, we want to be independent, we want to be a base for NATO here, right by the Black Sea, right next to with borders with Russia. Well, this is what happens. The Russians get paranoid. They say, no, this is unacceptable for us. So you have war. A lot of innocent people get killed because this president of who used to be an actor, Here's the thing, folks. When I say democracy, really, I don't think democracy is a good idea, period. You see, there are many examples of it. Let's go over this Ukraine example. There is a foundation that is apparently getting financed by the CIA. It's a EAD, FED, Foundation for Advancement of Democracies. Something like that. FED or FED, Foundation for FAD, Foundation for Advancement of Democracies. Or Endowment for Advancement of Democracies, EAD. This is some organization that very few people know of. Apparently it was set up and to under the banner of let's spread democracy, as if democracy has done so well for those who already have it. You know, the education is bad, the healthcare is bad, the housing is bad, but we have $150,000 Javelin missiles and we are, blowing shit up on the other side of the planet. Apparently democracy has worked very well for those who have it. So this endowment for advancement of democracies has to, spend a lot of money in order to advance this silly system of picking incompetent as leaders. This picking incompetent people as leaders is something that needs to, be advanced. So apparently this organization with funding from CIA has spent $22 million in Ukraine. I'm wondering, some money in terms of bribes is going to the politicians of Uncle Sam, to the managers of Uncle Sam or their friends and family, and some money from the CIA goes into apparently making the system more corrupt. Because here's the thing, what happens? This money has gone, $22 million in a poor country like Ukraine. $22 million goes a long way. I know this is because CIA spent $500,000 in 1953. CIA spent $500,000 in Iran to change the government. There was a democratically elected government. There was, real politicians who got elected, and the CIA went in with $500,000, orchestrated a coup, changed the government, and that's it. Brought a fucking king back into place. The same CIA goes into Ukraine now in the past 10 years apparently. They have spent $22 million in advancing what? Democracy. That you find that the actor, 30-something, the guy is like 30, 35, 40, a relatively young actor, you pull him out of, show business and you put him in the seat of power and he feels empowered. Yes, we need to have independence. Yes, we don't want to take orders from Russia. Yes, we don't want to even, play footsie with Russia. We want to play footsie with Hunter Biden. We want to play footsie with, Mr. Giuliani. Well, and then you get into war and you're wondering why the fuck you got into war. Why the fuck your people are, getting killed? The guy is absolute incompetence in my view. As I said, a competent politician who understands geopolitics and looks at Cuba and sees a country that has been sitting in the penalty box for 50 years, looks at himself and said, hey, I'm in this neighborhood. I'm not in South America or Central America. I'm in this fucking neighborhood. I'm in a neighborhood with the fucking big penis, paranoid penis that is Russia. I better play nice with the fucking paranoid penis. I'm not, I'm not Canada, I'm not Mexico, I'm Russia's neighbor. So, and that is it. Simple facts of life is this: the people I don't want to have as enemy are my neighbors. I'm not, nobody's really concerned if they have a neighbor across town or in another country or on the other side of the planet. Nobody's really concerned about that. But your neighbor, you don't want as enemy, because every day you have to deal with your neighbor. Every fucking day. So you don't want to wrong your neighbor. You want to respect them. You want to deal with them. You want to, work things out with your neighbor. That's what Ukrainians should have done. Work things out. Hey, you don't want us part of NATO? Yes, we understand, because we are your neighbor and NATO is apparently your opposition. So, okay, we sit down and we talk, and, you give us a good deal, and we promise we will be neutral. We will not be part of NATO as long as you give us a good deal. If there is any corruption, here's the way Russians are looking at it. If there is any corruption is in place, they need to be paying us, because we are the big penis in this neighborhood, not paying Hunter Biden. This is how the Russians are looking at it. If there is any money to be handed out in a corrupt situation, you gotta be paying us, because we are your big brother in this neighborhood, not Hunter Biden, not Giuliani. This is simple. Now we are at the verge of nuclear war because democracy is good, and the Chef Boyardee over there, the comedian actor over there, doesn't understand geopolitics or doesn't care. He's doing it out of malice. He's also under orders. They have told him, you become president and you take this direction and you receive this much money. And he has become president and received that much money, and he's taken this direction that is taking his people to hell and back, hopefully back. If we get into a nuclear war, none of us is going to come back. This is simple, folks. But then I stopped listening to news. I stopped listening to even NPR. Forget about all the other news. It's sort of, if you say, hey, this is a reasonable thing to ask, that neighbors stay friendly with their neighbors, work some kind of deal out with their neighbors, and not necessarily should be, want to join in a joint association in a different neighborhood. Imagine this. Apparently this one is specifically for Mr. Stephen Colbert. Dude, imagine you're living in a neighborhood, in your own neighborhood, and there is a HOA, homeowners association, but you say, no, I don't want to be part of this fucking HOA. I hate this HOA. I want to become part of that HOA in that neighborhood. This is what, the whole idea behind Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO or doesn't want to be neutral and wants to be friends with the West and wants to, suck Uncle Sam's dick. Well, geography says it's not possible, because Ukraine is not in, it's not in this neighborhood. Ukraine is in that neighborhood. Ukraine has to work out some kind of a deal within that HOA. What is this idea that, our HOA covers the whole planet? So, we have members in Southeast Asia, Australia, everywhere there is white people of European descent, they can qualify to become part of the NATO HOA. There goes Australia, and then Western Europe, and then we slowly carve up. We need to put all Europe together under one NATO roof, but no, we don't want to deal with Russia. And I'm thinking, why nobody asked Russia to become part of NATO? It's simple, because Russia wants they think they should have as much say as Uncle Sam's managers in NATO. And I have a feeling Uncle Sam was not happy with that, never wanted to accept that Russians would have as much say in NATO as Uncle Sam's managers do. Therefore, the Russians they were invited to observe, and now last year they were asked to leave their observation post as well. So they were invited to observe, but never invited to join, because they knew, the Russians knew, and they knew that the Russians knew, and the Russians knew, and that they knew that the Russians want equal say, equal to Americans, if they ever became part of NATO, and Americans were never going to going for that. The American managers want to be the top dog. So, I mean, Belgium, I think Belgium is part of NATO, and Iceland is part of NATO, but they don't have any say. They're there. They are colonies of Uncle Sam in Europe as part of NATO. They don't have any say. For the same reason that there are, Uncle Sam's military bases in those countries, in Belgium and in Iceland and in France and in Spain and in Portugal, and these shitty small European countries, Uncle Sam's military bases are all over there. But none of those shitholes have a military base in Uncle Sam's property. That's how you can tell NATO is not an equal partnership. And that's another thing that, Mr. Trump didn't understand, that he thought why everybody else is not donating enough to the NATO organization is because they're actually your colonies. Germans don't have a military base in the United States. United States has military base in Germany. So, I mean, this is not an equal partnership. This is not a partnership amongst equals. This is a partnership in which America's managers decided that it's in their benefit to have a foothold in Europe because they benefit from their foothold in Europe. And one of the reasons is, fight back against the Asians and Eurasians in that side against Russia. And then, having some allies to, just so you can, in the United Nations, say we and our allies, to go kick some ass in Africa and Asia. Again, every time that NATO did any action in Africa and Asia, there is like a battalion of, American soldiers, and there is like 3 Germans and 2 Belgians and 5 Frenchmen and 10 British. That's we and our allies. That's how it is. It's just gives a bit more legitimacy to. Unfortunately, gives a legitimacy. NATO gives a bit of legitimacy to those of Uncle Sam's managers who believe in colonialism, have colonial ideas, like to colonize other places on this planet. Those managers of Uncle Sam, they need a bit of a whale of legitimacy, and NATO gives them that whale of legitimacy to conquer and call it something legitimate by saying that we have allies, they all agree with us to, we have to go conquer here and we have to go conquer there. They don't call it conquer, they just say, there are terrorists here and there are terrorists there, and we have to go take care of those terrorists and the other terrorists and the other terrorists. I'm not sure where the fuck all these terrorists were 100 years ago, 200 years ago when there was no United States, 300 years ago when there was no United States. I'm not sure who was taking care of all these African terrorists, all these Asian terrorists. I'm not sure who was taking care of. I mean, at that time, again, you can say, Algerians, the French kept calling the Algerians who wanted independence and didn't wanted French soldiers on their soil. The French kept calling those Algerians as terrorists. and there was the Viet Minh, then the Vietnamese who didn't want to accept French rule over them and were fighting them. The French called them terrorists. They called them Viet Minh, and then the Viet Minh turned into Viet Cong after Uncle Sam decided to join in this suppressing the local shitheads. Folks, this is all colonialism. This is not about freedom. This is not about independence. This is not about. This is about getting paid. This is about expanding the empire. This is about having, democracy is a foolish form of government. Democracy at this point, I have to say that I've seen what is happening under democracy. I've seen it. I've seen it in France, in Germany, not Germany. I've seen it in France. I've seen it in the fucking British. I've seen it, with Uncle Sam's managers, that in democracy, or at least you can say in this form of democracy that these folks in charge insist that we have to export this specific kind of democracy. Well, in this specific kind of democracy, people who get elected are getting elected with no background check, with no pre-qualification. Forget about well, you can say background check in case of India. There is like half of their parliamentarians in India are under criminal investigation. In their democracy, they're under fucking criminal investigation. Half of their parliament, more than half. Anyway, but forget about, there is no qualification. This actor in Ukraine should not have become a president. Period. Should not have been able to put his name forward to become a candidate, to become a president, because he doesn't understand. Obviously, he doesn't understand geopolitics. 1, 2. There should be a background check. Who has been sitting with him? Who has he been talking to? Who has told him that he should run for? Who's backing him? That $22 million that endowment for advancement of democracies have donated in Ukraine. How much of that has gone towards candidacy of this actor? This comedian who's burning down his own country by not working out the deal with Russia. Who's been paying that? That's the CIA money. Here is the thing, folks. In 1979, the Iranians did a really bad thing. They took over the American embassy in Tehran and took 100 and something hostages, I think. And they kept them for a long time, almost a year, I think. A very bad thing. It's like political immunity, was disregarded, and because the Iranians were really pissed off, I think. It was a bad thing, but that made it into the news. You see, that made it into the news, and Americans were very pissed off. My pink-skinned friends all over the world, in Uncle Sam's land, as well as in Europe, all over, especially the pink-skins, because they saw their kin being, held hostage by the Iranians. Everybody was pissed. It's like, what the fuck? These motherfucking cocksuckers. You motherfuckers, you take our people hostages. What kind of people are you? You cocksuckers, you motherfuckers. And one could see why. It was an abnormal act. And everybody was pissed off. Well, that was in the news for a year, that Iranians did such a thing. You know what didn't make it into the news? What didn't make it in the news was in 1953, 63, 73, 79, 20 something years before that, what happened didn't make it to the news at all. In fact, it was secret. It was kept secret for 60, 70 years. You know what happened? It was the fact that the CIA took $500,000 to Iran after Iranians had a democratic election, chose a guy. The guy wasn't playing footsie with the British, i.e., the guy who got elected closed down the British petroleum shop in Iran. The British Petroleum had taken over Iranian oil, and they didn't want to. They were taking it out of the ground, and they were taking it to their own country, and they were refining it in fucking British Island, and then selling it, and giving maybe a percent, 1% or 2% of the profits to the Iranians. That's it. The Iranians were getting very small, within single digit percentage of the profits of their own oil was coming from underneath their land. So this guy who got democratically elected, they told the British to fuck off. The British went to CIA, to the American managers at that time. American managers at that time went to the CIA, and CIA went to Iran with $500,000 and orchestrated a coup d'etat, removed the elected prime minister of Iran, and brought back another dictator, and it was like that until 1979. That dictator was running the show on behalf of CIA and MI6 with friendly terms with British Petroleum. Well, they increased the percentage from like 2% or 3% to 10%. We give you 10% of the profit. Fuck it. So what everybody saw on their TV, like media as you see right now, what everybody saw was that the hostages were taken. Bad. What nobody knew and nobody got to know for another 20, 30 years later, that before that, 20 years, 25 years before that, the Iranian democracy was demolished by the CIA 20 years before that hostage crisis. So it's sort of like, you know that game that you're sitting there and a guy is sitting next to you and you slap him upside the head. You wait for somebody to pass by. It's a gag. You wait for somebody to pass by and then you slap your friend upside the head and you look at the other side, hoping that, your friend, picks a fight with the guy standing behind him, thinking that he was the guy who slapped him. This is sort of like that. You see, the CIA, these covert organizations, endowment for spread of democracies, endowment for promotion of democracies, or whatever the fuck they call it. It's sort of like that guy standing there nudging a country into chaos by, pushing some incompetent leaders there, or pushing for a coup d'etat, or pushing for a revolution, or pushing for whatever, or pushing for just, election of incompetent leaders, or, leaders with malice on their mind. And it's sort of like smacking the guy and looking the other way. And then when the shit happens and there is a war taking place, there is a fight takes place between that guy and some innocent guy standing behind him, then nobody apparently have seen that, this guy, he was the guy who created this bad situation, this chaos. This is exactly what is happening. These covert organizations go in, start something, but don't talk about it. It's national security. We can't talk about it. It's national security. Don't talk about it for 50, 60 years, but what they start will eventually result in a big conflict, in a revolution, in a war, in a big conflict, which will show up on your TV screen. The conflict, the result of that initial act has a repercussions, has a blowback. You see the blowback on your screen, but you weren't paying attention that who actually started this chain of event was the CIA, was the MI6, was the NATO. Nobody sees, nobody's paying attention, and nobody will talk about it because it's national. Those who actually were involved don't talk about it because it's national security. So you keep on blaming the Russians and this and the Iranians and the Russians, and this is bad and that is bad and the other is bad, while you actually don't have the whole story, because they don't tell you the whole story because it's a covert organization. They only will divulge the story 50, 60 years later when, a couple of generations have passed, everybody has forgotten what happened. Then they say, yes, it was us. Yeah, that was us. You see how good we are. We did something that resulted into that, and nobody could do anything about it. Well, my friends at the endowment for propagation of democracies, my friend at the CIA, my friend at the MI6, if nuclear war happens, we are all going to die. So I'm not sure exactly who's paying you, why you're so apparently indebted to these corporations that you create all this chaos in order to have more influence, which might actually end up in nuclear war. It's amazing. Amazing. Amazing.